education hour might be a little bit different of a presentation, more of a community resource type. But I had referred a family to Kate, who was looking to do some legacy work. The man was definitely a storyteller, and the family was wanting a way to capture that in video form. So Kate joins us from Life Chronicles and is based
So
in.
as Christy said, it was personal when I started Life Chronicles 26 years ago. A dear friend of mine, and I will say our focus is seniors and seriously ill. So you don't necessarily have to have a serious illness. Seniors are also a part of what we do, and sometimes it's both, a senior with a serious illness. But when I started, it was for one of my very close friends who was diagnosed with breast cancer just 6 weeks after her husband passed from ALS, and their children were 16, 13, and 10. And I'd been trained in video production. I always wanted to do something meaningful with it. I had offers in the professional or the for-profit field of video, but I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to do something meaningful with what I knew how to do. And when my friend told me that she'd been given a short time to live, I said, I want to sit you in front of a camera and have the kids tell you everything you want them to know for the rest of their lives. And that's what we did. And we started it actually the day she passed. We started it as an organization. And now we've done almost 2,000. And I hope it's completely up to date, but our list of cities served now is 435 cities in the United States, two in Great Britain, and five now in Canada. And I will tell you, for the lady who's on there, I don't know your name, but something important for you to know before you leave is that I've done a lot of ALS work. And I know, and I've worked with the national headquarters in Baltimore often. But one of the most memorable ones I did was for a young father in New Mexico, Albuquerque. And he was the head of the tennis program at the University of New Mexico. And then he got ALS and couldn't do that anymore. But he had two young boys. In fact, they named the department after him. Was a really well-known tennis coach and player. Anyway, I came to film him with his two sons and his wife. And after we'd filmed for a while, they said, can we stop for lunch? And as we sat in their kitchen, he and his wife wanted me to know that of all the things that the ALS Association had offered them, to them, this was the most significant because it meant that their boys would be able to have this of him after he was gone. And so I filmed people in different stages and with different forms of ALS. We know there are different ways that manifest in people. It's different for a lot of people. But I have filmed people who can no longer speak. And we've made that work very successfully. And one of the things we've learned in our work anyways, because we serve so many different situations, we've learned to be very flexible and find ways to accomplish what people need. But I know that ALS is so perfect for us because so many people with ALS lose the ability to speak, and they want to be able to convey what they want to convey in some form before they can communicate at all. I did a man here locally, quite an amazing man. He had a PhD from Caltech, which is our MIT of California, very famous place. Brilliant man. His wife had a PhD from Caltech. Their son had a PhD from Caltech. I filmed them several times, and I used to tease them that was like filming a house of big brains, big brains. But her husband, the man I filmed, the husband, he was beginning to lose the ability to speak when I first came. And so we did a whole session with him and with his wife, which we encourage people to do it together. And then he asked me to come back a couple of more times. And each time he had progressed a little more. So by the third time, he could only speak through a tablet that he was able to key into. As he really progressed, he could activate the letters with his eyes. But then at some point, he lost the ability to do that. He was really an interesting man. I said to him one time, I said, I get the feeling that you want to be here as long as possible as long as you can communicate. And he said, yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I've filmed people with ALS. I filmed a 34-year-old doctor, orthopedic surgeon with a 2-year-old child. And his intention was he was not going to do all of the interventions or whatever. I'm not sure what the phrase is. Christy, maybe you know better than I, but all of the modalities maybe that can be done for people with ALS. But he was not interested in that. Being a doctor, he felt like he knew what the course was going to be, and he wasn't willing to take it the full course. So there was no Death with Dignity Act at the time. There is in California now, but that wasn't what he was talking about. He just didn't want to do the interventions like the breathing tube and the feeding tube and all that. He just wanted it to take its course. But meanwhile, he said, I need to do this as soon as possible. Everyone we've ever done this for has loved it. I filmed a man in Baltimore, outside of Baltimore, who I filmed him with his son. Great story. The two of them were very close. His wife had died at 28 years old. And so this man had raised his son by himself. So they were super close. And I filmed them together, which was great. And then unexpectedly, the man passed a couple of weeks later. One of the things I encourage people is to please don't wait to do this if it's what you want, because things can change. And I don't say that to frighten people, but having done almost 2,000 of these, things can change. Things can change outside of ALS. Things can change for everybody. And I always tell people, you're never going to look better than you do today. And that applies to everybody. So it's kind of a joke, but it's not a joke. It's really true. You should do it. You should even do it if there isn't an issue, even for people who don't have ALS or any other health issues. People should do this because we just don't know what our time is here. We don't know how long we get to be here. And leaving something like this for the people you love, it's the most valuable thing that you can leave them. And I also find it very interesting for people that I'm filming. It's very empowering for them because in the process, and we do it in a very relaxed, casual way. I'm sure the McNulty family would tell you. We basically sit down together and I ask them, please don't prepare. It's not necessary. And it takes that off your plate. You don't have to worry about notes or, drawing up an outline or any of those things because I sit across from you with a camera and it's like a conversation, but a conversation that I am cut out of or whoever's facilitating that day, they're cut out of it. So it's like you did this without a stranger there. It helps you accomplish what it is you want to say without feeling like there's a stranger in the middle of your video who your family's going, who's that person? Nobody cares about the interviewer. It's all about the person and the family that we're filming. Often, because we sit the family together, there are conversations that happen that they often tell us probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't sat down there together that day. And I never know what's going to happen. You never know what you're going to hear. But people find that it's an opportunity to maybe tie up some loose ends, cover some bases, maybe that need to be covered. And it could be practical things, I asked this one man if he wanted to tell his wife something he always wanted her to remember. And he said something about turning off the kitchen light before she left to go to bed at night. Was it not exactly what I was going for? But I don't put words in people's mouths either. And that's just the kind of guy he was, and the family would surely know that that's just who he was, I would have said, I want you to remember I always loved you and I will always love you or something like that. But we don't put words in people's mouths. We want this to be authentic, which is another reason we don't give a list of questions because we don't want people thinking ahead of time, in their head what they're going to say because it's less authentic, and not spontaneous. So we don't want people, scripting ahead of time because it's not necessary for one thing. Often, but people will say, well, we made a list anyway. And I go, that's totally great. So I'll do my thing. And then when I get done, I'll ask them, should we look at your list and see if there's anything we didn't cover? And they almost always go, no, that was it. And it's just because of having done this for 26 years, there's not a lot I haven't seen, but also in the process of doing this, I get to know the person and their family dynamic and the family. And a lot of the questions come organically from I'm listening to that person tell their story and I will ask them something else. A lot of times we tell our stories too, and we forget details because we know the details and we assume everybody sitting with us knows them. So part of the job of the facilitator is to ask those questions. So I like to think of it in terms of if this was someone who'd never met you before, never knew you, maybe a future grandchild or great grandchild or other family in the future, that by the time they finish watching the video, they feel like they know you. And so that's why we try to make it very spontaneous and authentic and so that's why we also don't have a list of scripted questions because everybody's different. Every family dynamic is different. So there's not a lot of point in drawing up a list of questions that may not apply to different people, you know. And again, having done it for so many years, um, I can pretty much tell what to ask. A lot of times I will ask way more questions than a family would have thought to ask on their own, just because I've done it for so long. Do you have any questions? I mean, there's a lot more I can tell you, but any questions at all?
Do you have any questions? Not right now. Um, in all of your past videos, what are people's biggest hesitations before like deciding to do this?
Oh, well, the biggest that's a perfect question because he helps me a lot. One of the biggest hesitancies with people is that they think if they've done this, it means they're giving up. And we realized very early on that that was a hurdle that we needed to help people with. Because the fact is, if you live to be 90 or 100, you'll never regret doing this. You'll be glad you did it no matter what. Um, but it's not about giving up. It's about taking care of a piece of business that you'll always be glad you did. Almost like doing a will.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to do a will. We finally just did ours a couple months ago, my husband and I. But this is something that I did for my family probably 13 years ago when my Chicago director knew I was going to have outpatient surgery under general anesthesia. She called me. She said, Kitty, I'm not saying you're going to die tomorrow, but when the time comes and you do go, if you haven't done this for your own family, they're going to be really upset with you. And I'd never thought of it that way. So I sat down and my daughter ran camera for me, which was fun. And I did it different than other people did because again, it's a very personal thing. So I didn't talk so much about family history. My family history is not really a very good history, but I talked to my children about, growing up and um, I'd been divorced and remarried, and I've been married for 42 years, but wanted them to know all about that experience and what I took away from that. Not lecturing them, just giving my experience to them, telling them how much I love them, telling them what it was I love about them. All those bases that were important to me, which weren't necessarily would be important to other people. And then I didn't look at it for years. And when I finally did, I went, wow, I'm going to love this if I live to be in my 90s. Because it looked pretty good. But also, it was just great to know that I'd covered that and my family was going to have that. So when I finished that day, I remember going, wow, that was a great experience, which I'd heard from everyone I'd ever filmed, how much they loved the experience of it. But I'd never quite tried to figure out what it was. So when I sat down, I came up with three things. The first thing was big check mark off my to-do list. It was done and put away, and I never had to think about it again. Secondly, I think there are things we think that we tell the people close to us because we think it in our heads all the time, but we don't necessarily say them to those people. And so I got a chance to say all the things I wanted them to know. And third, when the time comes and I go, I'm pretty sure my last thought's going to be, I'm so glad I did that video for my kids because they're going to never forget me, and always feel connected. An interesting thing, when we first started, we were given a doctoral dissertation. It was about this thick, bound in leather and really nice. They gave it to us. And it was a doctoral dissertation on separation anxiety of children in hospitals. And what the study was doing was using video. So they do these scenarios where one time, because the point was no one can be with the child 24/7. the parents, they maybe have other kids at home or they have to go to work or whatever. And when these kids are in the hospital a long time, there's a lot of anxiety when the parents have to be gone for a while. So the idea was to have videos for the kids, but the study needed to show that it was therapeutic. So the first scenario was just filming a nurse reading a book, a children's book. And then the second one was the nurse and the child together reading. And then the third one was a mother reading a children's book. And then the fourth one was the mother and child together reading the book. And what the study just verified, which is logical, was that the most beneficial for the child was the video of the mother and child together. But what was interesting for us when we started this work and it informed our process was that the study showed that by filming them together, whoever remains or whoever's gone, whoever's still there, remembers not just the sight and sound of that person, they remember what it felt like to be with them. And there's nothing bigger than that, especially a lot of our videos are dying young parents leaving very small children. And so not only will those children remember the sight and sound of their parent, they will actually remember what it felt like to be with that parent. And it just doesn't get any bigger than that. So there's just a lot of things that we've constantly tried to improve what we do. And truthfully, when we started this, we thought it was kind of like a video scrapbook, just memories, but it's turned out to be much more than that because as we moved along, we saw that a lot of people we filmed wanted an opportunity to say some things and sometimes say some things that their family didn't want them to talk about because, oh, don't talk about that. You're going to be fine. We don't need to talk about that. And oftentimes the person we're filming really has a need to talk about some things, especially if they don't think they're going to be here very long. They want to just cover those bases. And it's always been great. The families, once it's happening, they're totally fine. You know, I was filming a family with ALS outside of Baltimore, and it was a mother of a woman who was on CNN for a long time. And she's not there anymore, but she was a journalist for CNN. And when I got there, she and her sister, they were twins, said, don't talk about ALS with my mom with this. Don't talk about ALS. And I said, I'll do whatever you want. If that's what you want to do, that's what I'll do. Because I always honor whatever the family wants. I don't even have to have people together on camera. We just encourage it because we've seen that it's been really well received by all the families, but they don't have to. So anyway, we filmed for a while and then they needed to address their mother's feeding tube. So we took a break. And when I came back, and so by this time they'd had a couple of hours with us, to see what the process was like and to see what I was like and how I interacted with their mother. And when I came back, I said to them, because we were going to do some more, I said, I just want you to know that if your mother goes there and wants to talk about ALS, I'm going to go there with her. And they said, we're fine with that. See, they just needed to get comfortable. They just needed to feel comfortable with how their mom was being treated, how the whole thing was being gently handled, and then they were fine with it. So it's a process, of knowing the best way to go forward with any particular person.
Yeah, I love that you spend time with them, make them feel comfortable.
Yeah,
Mm,
it's important because it makes it so much easier. And I know what's interesting is when we get started and once I can see that they're comfortable. I can see that they're not even looking at the camera anymore. They're just talking to me. I can see that they're comfortable and where they're going to be fine. And I really haven't had anybody who didn't get comfortable, you know. Even Mr. McNulty, who was kind of, I think he was a little bit resistant to the whole thing at first. And then once he got comfortable, man, he was a chatterbox.
Oh, of course, yes.
It was great.
Um, how else would people prep for these candid videos and interviews?
We actually asked them, please don't prepare. First of all, it's exhausting for people who are already struggling. See, when we started, one of the things we said was, we need to make this effortless for people because many people that we film, everything is an effort for them. So we don't want to walk in and make things any more of an effort for them. So we asked them, please don't prepare. It's not necessary. And You know, the only thing we talk to them about is maybe what to wear, something that's not stripes or checks, because it weirds out the camera lens and makes things jumpy. And then we try to do in a room with good light. We have professional lights. We almost never use them. They're hot and they make people uncomfortable. They're too bright, and we just don't need them. As long as we have a nice room with good natural light, everything's fine. So we try to make, and that's why we also don't say an interviewer. We talk about a facilitator. And one time we were all having a discussion about when we were doing trainings, and um, the word facilitator is perfect because it comes from facile, and facile means to make effortless or to make easy, which is exactly our goal when we're doing this, is to make this as effortless for people as we can, so that by the time we finish, you know, they may be tired because they've talked for 3 hours, like Mr. McNulty. But other than that, they feel really satisfied. We've gotten really beautiful reviews from people about how had such a sense of satisfaction when they finished, and they felt so at ease that they've done it, that they've taken care of it for their family.
Absolutely. I personally am like the family photographer and videographer. I always have my phone out trying to capture moments in time. So I love this passion project of yours, and I can absolutely see how it's therapeutic and so important
Very.
to have them in the space with them communicating. I get
Well, Keck Medical School at USC, University of Southern California, has actually done a white paper on our work about the therapeutic value of what we do. We know it's therapeutic. In fact, a long time ago, I was filming in Boston, and as I walked out, one of them said, "Thanks for the therapy, Katie." And I never said a word about that. I've heard that so many times. I filmed a man who walked in, and it was his turn to do a one-on-one with his dad. And as he walked in, he says, "Okay, I'm ready for my therapy." And I never ever say that, but once we get started the process, they can tell that this is therapeutic for everybody. You know, wasn't our intention when we started. We had no idea that that would happen, but it's just grown organically. Much to consider. Yes. Yes. Oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome.
So what is like the time investment as
And
far as,
actually doing it,
yeah.
well, it is very much dependent on how much energy the person has and how much they have to say. And we never tell someone they have to stop. Um, but I will say that generally speaking, from the time I walk in till the time I walk out, it's 3 hours, and it's usually about 2 hours of footage. And but we never tell someone they have to stop if they want to keep talking. And but we don't necessarily, I mean, I've had ones that go very long when there's like 15 family members there and it's a lot. But I always tell people, just remember in the future, who's going to watch a 4 hour video or a 5 or 6 hour video, no matter how much they loved you, that's a lot. And a lot of times when you do that, you end up with a lot of repetition. So we do a lot of editing to try to, like I was working on a piece today where it's 3 hours, but the man we filmed asked us to come back and do some more. And much of the second session, he had already told us. So we're just going to go through there and pick out which version is the better one and cut it down so there's not repetition.
Yeah, that's a lot of footage. What is your turnaround on all of that for
So
editing and
it's
putting it all together?
always different. The McNulty's, and I had to burn a DVD for Mr. McNulty. We haven't done DVDs in a long time, but thankfully we still have them. And just in case, I even have one VHS tape left.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
because
impressive.
I had an elderly priest who we filmed, and it was in his last 6 months of life, which he knew. And he said, "Can you do it on a VHS tape?" He goes, "I'm not going to buy any new technology at this point." And I just happen to have a couple of them, and so I still have one, and never know, it could happen. But I filmed them in May, the McNulty's, and we've just got everything finished. And that's actually sooner than a lot of people. What our process is, because we juggle so many at the same time and with a very limited staff, and it takes so much time for each project. And we do a photo montage to music if that's what they want, which the McNulty's did. And that's very time consuming because we go in and we crop those pictures and we enhance them if they need some cleanup on them or whatever. It's very involved. But so our process is that we film them, and as quickly as possible, we get back home and we put it into the editing bay and we export it into a link as raw footage. And one of the things I like about that is it's not the final product, but they can actually hear me and hear all of our interaction. Because sometimes there's interaction that they might not have remembered, or I may have explained something to them in the process. So I like that they have all of it. And we do that so that they have in hand as quickly as possible everything we did that day. But the final project will have the facilitator cut out. We put little, they're called lower thirds, little titles in the bottom left-hand side of the screen that says what the question is that the facilitator asked or what the subject changed to. For example, if I said, "When were you born, Chrissy?" How would you answer? How would you answer?
January 19th.
Right. And if we cut out my question and that's all you said, whoever's watching is going to go, "Well, what
Uh,
was that?" So that's why we put a little title on there. That's all you need. The day I
mhm.
was born, and it goes right there. So it makes it so that there's no stranger in that video, but everybody understands what the subject is or what it changed to or what the question was. And then we put some credits on the end so people can see who did camera that day, who did facilitating, our website, all of our contact information, and then a little statement on the end about donations. And mostly we do that because if someone comes across this and they don't remember who we are or where this all happened, all that information is at the end of the video.
That's great. You mentioned donations.
Mhm.
Um, can you talk about like fees or what you charge or how
So
you
we
charge?
don't, we're a nonprofit, so I have to say we don't charge per se, but like many nonprofits, I work with hospices and cancer centers and all the other nonprofits I work with, they do ask for donations, and so we do too. But the important thing that most important to me as the founder is that people understand that no one gets turned away. No one gets turned away. We have a number of people. I have a family up in San Francisco right now. This woman is on Social Security and she can't work and she's living hand to mouth every day. We're still going to do this video for her. And so we do our best to raise funds. And part of asking for donations is so that we can cover everybody. And so some years ago, the board realized I never know when people call what their financial situation is. I don't ask them. I'm not comfortable with that anyway. Um, but the board realized that there were quite a few people that we filmed who were very financially sound, better than sound. And because we weren't proactively asking, they weren't giving as well as they could. And it wasn't their fault. We weren't proactively asking. It really came down to us. So the board went out and did some research on what it would cost to have this done in the for-profit world, which is hard to do because there's nobody doing this professionally. Well, we're professional too, but nobody's doing it for profit. Um, so especially for 26 years. But they did the best to come up with some kind of like a comp, And so they came up with a number and they understand that 9 times out of 10, I'm the person who has to have that conversation with people, which not my favorite conversation. I'm not in this for the money. In fact, none of us are, but we can't operate without funds. So they came up with a number and we basically asked people to do whatever part of that they can. So the number they came up with is $3,500. I know it sounds like a lot, but anyone who knows video production knows how much it costs and how much time goes into it, how much extra expertise it requires to come up with what we come up with for people, not to mention our experience of the interviews and going to people where they are. But we tell people please just donate whatever part of that you can, and we don't have any judgment on what people donate. We believe that people do what they can, and we don't have any judgment on that. So we've had people give 10 times that because they could. And we've had people give very little, very little. I mean, I filmed a young man who had 2 young boys and his wife, and he hadn't been able to work for 6 years. He had a really bad form of cancer. And I remember his wife handed me a little $25 check that she gave me. And I almost started crying because I knew from being in their home, $25 was significant to them. And so I was very moved that they just wanted to give me something before we left because it was so important to them. And years later, we were in a local mall doing a presentation for we had had a terrible catastrophic event in Santa Barbara where 22 people lost their lives in a debris flow. And so we were in the local mall there inviting people to tell their stories. And anyway, this young man walked up to us. He was 16 years old, and he was one of those two boys whose mom had given me a $25 check. And he said, "Your Life Chronicles, right?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Well, we watch my dad's video every year at Christmas time, and that's how we remember our dad." And they went and they hugged and kissed each one of us. So truly, we just ask people to do what they can, and no judgment on that.